for you guys. Good morning, guys. Good afternoon, evening. Sorry, it's been a week. This is your host, Jamarcus Lee of the Me, Myself, and podcast. I'm so excited for you guys to be joining us today. We have an awesome guest in here with us today. It's going to be none other than Pastor Padden. I met him maybe about a couple weeks ago at his dad's church event we played at. And we have connected ever since. So I want to go ahead and bring him in. I'm so excited to bring him in. So let's bring in Padden. What's up, Padden? How we doing, man?
Hey, I'm doing great, Jamarcus. How you doing, man?
Hey, I'm so excited to finally get doing this. I feel like, since I've been on a high, low-key been on a high ever since, what was that? Student camp for refinery. I've low-key been on a
Oh
high.
yeah.
Like, it was crazy what happened that weekend. I know for me personally, I was not expecting it to have that type of impact because, most people kind of like, oh, it's students camp. We're going to just go have fun, do stuff. But I'm like, this is like a real thing. Like, like these kids are actually like worshiping and pouring out. And then for guys who don't know, Peyton spoke and I told him when he got done, I said, you were speaking to the children, but you were speaking to me. Like, this message was well rounded for like everybody, and I was like, I gotta have you on the show, like, because what he brought, I think it was like in two messages, and it wasn't even more than like 30 minutes. I'm like, he just wrecked my whole life right there. And then what he did, he did a whole mess with a rock, and then he left the rock there. Then I come back the next day, the rock is still there, and I'm like, oh dang, like it's still here, like I gotta leave it all. So Payne, I'm gonna give you a minute, introduce yourself, and just tell us a little about yourself and like what's going on, man.
Yeah, absolutely. So we met a couple weeks ago at Refineries Camp, and man, we had a blast. But my name is Payden. I am currently a next gen pastor at a church in Las Vegas called Verve, and so I get to hang out with kids. Basically, is my job, which I love, man. It's so stinking awesome. I oversee all of our kids stuff from birth all the way through high school ministry, and I'm just loving it, man. I grew up in the Phoenix area. Live in Las Vegas now, so it's nice because the weather is about the same.
Yeah.
So that's super nice. Spent a little bit of time in Kansas as well during college. My wife likes the weather here in Las Vegas much more than she did in Kansas. The cold was just not her thing, and so. But man, I love Vegas, man. I love Phoenix. But yeah, I'm just here. I'm just doing my thing, man. So.
Man, that's cool. Like, I don't know. I'm the opposite of your wife. I love the cold. So anytime I chance I get back to go home to like Utah, I cherish it because the weather is so different. Like, I am not a heat person. I've been here for 22 years, and the heat still messes me up every year. So like, I'm like, I gotta get somewhere cool. Eventually, I'm gonna move, but I don't know where I move yet. Somewhere, somewhere closer. So like, I know like your whole family. Like, I met your dad before I met you.
Mm-hmm.
And then I met you, and I was like, "Oh, I totally see your dad in you." So
That's what everybody says, man. That's what everybody says.
like I met you through your dad. So like, with your dad being like a pastor, like how was it like growing up? Like, did you always think that you were going to follow like the full-time ministry role, or like how did that go? Like, did you? Because I know some people resist because like I don't want to follow my dad, I want to do my own thing. But like, how was that
Yeah.
for you?
I definitely would say it was never for a long time. It wasn't my dream or passion to become a pastor until really I got towards the end of towards the end of getting close to graduating high school. I was a sports guy. I played sports all growing up. I played soccer, ran track, kicked for the football team, that kind of stuff. And so like that was kind of like my world I lived in. I was ready to like get a soccer scholarship and go play soccer in college. Didn't really want to do the whole pastor thing. It wasn't that I hated the church or anything like that. I loved church. I loved the way I grew up. But it kind of just felt like it wasn't for me. But then God kind of got a hold of my heart in between my junior and my senior year of high school, and kind of showed me through a couple of different things, like that this is kind of the stuff that I have for you. And man, I'm glad I listened, because so much better than I could have dreamed or imagined myself. So
Man, that's cool. So like, because I know your sister's a pastor as well, and she teaches. Like, who got the pastor bug first? Like, was it a competition? Like, who's gonna get it first, or were you guys both kind of like reluctant in the beginning, and you guys like at the same time was like, it's like
I
we're gonna have to do this.
so
Like,
it was it's so funny because we joke with my sister now about this. Like people, I was a people person growing up. I was I was constantly talking to people. I was outgoing, did sports, whatever. I wouldn't say I was popular, but like I was outgoing in high school. My sister was not that. Like, complete opposite. Was to herself. Was quiet. Came home and did her thing. And then when she went to college, she became a whole different person. Like Perry, 8 years ago and Perry now are two completely different people. And she would tell you that herself. Like, that's not a knock on her by any means or whatever, but like, she is a completely different person. And dude, she's fantastic, man. She can speak. She brings the word, and it's awesome, man. She can.
It's so funny because like you guys like have your different styles, but it's still all the same style in one. Like, I was there for a women's weekend and she was teaching like using like the cards and stuff, and I'm like, she's like so natural up there. Like, it's like she's supposed to be up there. Like, it's sometimes you see someone speaking and it's like, I don't think you're supposed to be up there. Like, you're just up there because you're up there. But it's like, she's like, you were called to this, like it flows off so naturally. So I'm like, I know as your dad, seeing like his kids like in active ministry, it has to be like something very cool for him to see.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I would even say this, like, I would say Perry is probably even a more natural speaker than I am. Like,
really,
just, like giftedness, like naturally, I think it comes to her easier than for me. Like, I have to work at it, like, in order for me to be, I would say, a good public speaker. Man, Perry speaks and like it just starts coming out. Like, it feels like sometimes. She's fantastic, man. I love listening to my sister talk.
Yeah, because when she's talking, I'm like, it's like you literally like couldn't look away. It's like, she's really teaching. Like, she's really teaching.
Yeah.
So like with you being like a next gen pastor, like, so do you get more nervous speaking in front of kids or speaking in front of adults? Like, for adults?
Adults, 100%. Adults for me, man. That's an easy fix or an easy pick for me. Students, you can like joke around with. They'll almost be a little responsive, you know, like while you're talking and stuff. And then adults sometimes, man, like,
they're the quietest people.
It's not that they're like non-responsive, but sometimes they're just like staring at you, and you're like,
literally,
but then they'll come up to you afterwards. And you're like, man, that was a great word. Like, you did such a great job. Or they'll compliment you in some way, and you're like,
I wouldn't.
That's
know.
awesome, but like there was no feedback from you. Like, there was no facial expression. There was no feedback. Nothing. But man, yeah, no, I teach just about every Sunday at our student ministry here in Vegas. And man, they're just fun. Like, it's just fun. I would definitely say students for me.
So like with your wife, is she active in ministry too? Like, so like how does she take this on? Like, my husband's going to be in like full-time ministry.
Yeah. So we started dating my senior year of high school. And I'll take one step back. So my wife actually grew up as a pastor's kid as well. So she grew up in the ministry as well. Grew up with her dad being a pastor. So she kind of knew what it all entailed before we even kind of got together. And then when we started dating in high school, we sat down and had a conversation. I was like, just so you know, like, this is kind of the path that I feel like God lead me down. Like, this is where I'm going to end up being, as being a pastor. I don't know what that's going to look like. I don't know what kind of ministry it's going to be. I don't know where that's going to be. But that's kind of what I like, where I feel led right now. And she was like, all right, let's do it. Like,
wow.
It's been super awesome. Like, she's fantastic, man. She helps serve in our kids ministry at church. She does a lot of curriculum stuff for us as well. And man, she is awesome. She keeps me in line a lot of the time. She is definitely our scheduler of the family. So like, I know that like, if I don't check the Google Calendar and accept her event invites and stuff, she sends me, like, I'm going to be in trouble. Like, I need to make sure that like everything's in order for us. But she does that so well, man. She anchors me. She keeps me on the ground. Man, Man, I love her to death, man. She's the best.
Man, that's great. Like right now, my wife, she's our scheduler of the house too, but she's like, I need to write it down, like plan a person. And normally I'm like, just send it to my calendar, like I'll see it, it'll pop up. But now as I'm like going, I'm like, yeah, write this down because I'm still gonna forget it. Like, so as soon as we like walk
No,
into like
we
common
do both here
areas,
too.
yeah, that we have it like huge calendars. Like this is what we're doing because our schedule gets so hectic. So we like really try to find times for ourselves, especially with 2 kids. So it's like mostly at night that we get it, but it's like we try to fit it in like where it's at. But it's like
Yep.
worked great with her like doing because I forget because I run like 100 miles an hour. I'm like a big thinker and she's like the details. Like I want to do all this.
Oh
And
yeah.
she's like, well, have you started that? What's one? I'm like, I don't know. I just want to do it. Like
Yep.
I'll figure that out later.
Yep.
So like with your dad being a pastor, do you think that with him being your dad that it is what you thought it was going to be, being working in full ministry, like seeing him doing it?
Um, there are some days yes, and there are some days no. I think that the coolest part for me, growing up as a pastor's kid, that in the sense of like it prepared me for ministry was there's not a lot of things that shock me in ministry anymore. I don't think.
Yeah.
Whereas if I would have been, either just a kid who grew up going to church, wasn't a pastor or anything like that. I think there would have been things that would have shocked me, like stuff that happens behind the scenes, or just the hurt that comes from people who come from different churches, or something like because we're all broken. Like
Yeah.
nobody's perfect. Like sin is in the world, and so everybody's got their own stuff they're dealing with. And I think growing up in ministry, I saw a lot of that, and I didn't. Maybe it wasn't that I dealt with it personally. Like I saw my dad handle things in certain ways, and I saw different pastors handle certain things in certain ways. And I think that really prepared me for like there's less shock for me if something was to happen, or if somebody's struggling with something, or if there's a crisis in a certain area. Like I think in that sense, that really prepared me for ministry. I would say I'm a pretty steady hand when it comes to chaos or uncomfortable situations. Like I remain pretty level headed through that kind of stuff, and I think I would accredit that to my dad being a pastor while I was growing up. Just that not a whole lot is really gonna shock me or phase me with a lot of that kind of stuff, I would say.
Well, that's cool. So like growing up, because you grew up in church, like what is the craziest thing you have seen in church that's like this is the all time, like I will never forget this moment in church?
Oh man, we did some fun stuff. When I was in youth ministry, when I was a high schooler in youth ministry. Man, what's the craziest? I don't know that I know the craziest thing. Man, I don't even know. Craziest thing.
Our most memorable thing.
Most memorable. Man, I mean, the things that I remember most were time. This isn't the fault of any youth pastor or anything like that. The times when we hung out as students outside of student ministry is when are the stuff that I remember most. Camp was always a highlight every year. Going to somewhere cool for camp and doing stuff like that. Events were always fun, but and we've talked about this before. There was a span the last 2 years of high school where we went to QT and hung out in the QT parking lot every single week after youth group.
I remember that.
I drove a pickup truck. Like we would drive. We could drive a quarter mile from the church to QT, and we literally were like, okay, we're all gonna get snacks. We're gonna hang out in the back of my truck. Like that's what we did like weekly. And so like when I look back, like I would say that's the most memorable kind of stuff. Like we just loved hanging out with each other. Like we just had this community it was so much fun. We just enjoyed it. And it was so funny. It was like, after a little while, it was like parents just knew like pickup was at QT. Like it wasn't like kids didn't get picked up from church. Like it was like, okay, we're all gonna pile into the cars. We're gonna go around the corner, go to QT, and parents just know to go pick up their students from QT. Like it was so funny. But I would say that's probably the most memorable kind of thing when I was a student, at least.
Okay, that's cool. And side note, so guys, if you guys are wondering what Booster Bro means, this is kind of where the story originated
This
from.
is true.
That whole student weekend, we kind of bonded over Rooster Boosters. You know, some people got Rooster for the first time, so we already had them. And it was probably the ongoing joke for the whole weekend. I still
Oh
laugh
man.
about it now. Like, it is super funny. And then knowing that your dad loved it as much as we did, I'm like, oh, that just made it even better. Like, just made it even, like, better.
Yep.
And then
I would say.
Oh, go ahead.
I would say, like, of any of us in that group that we had the Rooster Booster joke rolling with, like, my dad has drank more the Rooster Booster than anybody in that group. Like, that's what made that so funny, man. Like,
and then I tried his drink too with the Rooster Booster Mountain Dew. I'm like, why have I not tried this at all my whole entire life? I'm like, this is like super good. And
yeah,
like,
that was
that
was his go-to. Like, we would leave for church on Sunday mornings, and we passed by QT on the way to church. So we go to QT for breakfast, for something to drink on our way to church, and he would get Rooster Booster and Mountain Dew, and he would drink it right before services and stuff, and he'd be fueled for, the 3 or 4 services we had that day, and then he'd come home and he would crash right after service. And like, oh, it's so funny. Rooster Booster, man.
Yeah, every time I go to QT now, I get a Rooster Booster, and I get a pretzel unsalted. That's important.
Mm-hmm.
Unsalted. I'm like, this is for Payton. Like,
Yep.
this is where it's from. It's from Payton.
Yep.
So, like, like, have you ever, like, not regret it, but, like, have you ever thought, like, sometimes I don't want to do this, like, full time? Like, I could be doing something else in my life? Like, have you ever had moments like that?
I mean, I would say this. Like, I would say, if anybody in full-time ministry to your face tells you, I've never thought about not doing ministry, I've never thought about getting out of ministry, I would say that they're probably not telling the truth. I think, just being honest, like, if you're in ministry, you are in the business of, like, and I think my dad says this best, you're in the business of, like, soul care. Like, you are dealing with people's souls, and, like, their eternity, like, where their eternity lies. And so the hardest part about that is you're dealing with people who are sinful, just like you are. Like, you are dealing with people who are struggling with their own stuff, that have their own issues, that are dealing with their own thing. And I would say this, like, yes, there are times where you're like, man, this really, really is hard today. But the days where you're like, that's why I'm in ministry, when things are going well, when you baptize somebody, when you lead somebody to Christ for the first time, when you get to have that conversation that you've been praying for, for months on end, when that student shows up to student ministry that you've been talking to every week for for 6 months, when that happens, that those kind of things outweigh the days when you think about, like, is this really for me, so much. So, like, to answer shortly, like, of course there are times where I'm like, man, am I right for this? Should I be doing this? I could probably be making more money doing something different. But, like, the impact that God has, and like, when you get to come alongside God doing something really cool in somebody's life, there's nothing that, like, compares to that. So
yeah, and like, to sum your point up, I always think about to student weekend when we had them hold the glow sticks up, and it was like holding back tears. Like, man, this is why we do it. Like, to see, like, the kids, like, making those decisions, like, this is what it was all worth. This is what it was worth it all.
Totally, man. Like, it's those moments that make ministry, 10 times over worth it. When a student says yes to Jesus, when a student recommits their life, when a student commits to, like, hey, I think ministry might be for me, full-time ministry might be something that I want to pursue, man, that makes the stuff that we do and the stuff we go through so little, man. It's just like, it's so worth it. So worth it.
And it was like when that happened, it was kind of like this is like a God moment. Like, it's like you literally just have to, like, let it, like, sit there and was like, take this all in. Like, these young people are making decisions without us pressuring them, which was like
100%.
Like, we didn't pump and prime them. It was like, pick the color that, like, you feel is where you're leading at, and seeing them make their own decisions. It's like, wow, like, we're really doing something impactful. Because I know a lot of times when I was doing student ministry, it kind of seems something like you don't make an impact because you don't see its face value. You know, like
Yeah.
you're teaching, they're on their phones, like you go through different stuff, but it's like small stuff like that. It's like, this is why I got into this, you know,
Mm-hmm.
because like someone has to care for them and like someone has to like be able to like lead them in Christ. So
100%.
I think that's great. Um, sorry, excuse me. Yeah. So when like with your student ministries here, like, so how do you go about preparing your message? So like, do you like tailor it to like the kids that you already have, or are you like kind of like flowing with like what's going on in like the adult service?
Um, we do our own thing. We don't typically. There will be sometimes we may intermingle stuff with the
Mm-hmm.
adult services. We don't typically, do the same stuff that they're doing. I would say I definitely tailor stuff more towards our middle and high school students, based on what's going on in their lives, based on what I'm feeling like we need to talk about. Um, we use a curriculum called Orange, which their stuff is fantastic. For
Yeah.
anybody that is doing student ministry, that needs help with curriculum and stuff, man, check out Orange. They're the best. Um, their content, their help for student ministry leaders and stuff like that is so awesome. So I would encourage people to check that out as well. But yeah, we really do our own thing. And like I said, I try my best just to have a thermometer of what's going on in our student ministry. So I mean, just as an example of this, we started back up our normal Sundays meeting every week. We take a break during the summer and just do events and hangouts and stuff like that. And then during the school year is kind of when our normal student ministry Sunday nights happens. And the first week, 2 weeks before, I had a whole series planned for us. I had almost our whole semester planned and ready. And then 2 weeks before, I was like, man, we need to talk about something. And so 2 weeks before, I pulled the plug on what we were doing and shifted some stuff around and even moved an event weekend we were going to do just to have a 1 week series on friendship, like because there was some stuff happening and I was just like, man, we just need to talk about this, like not calling anybody out, not atting anybody on Twitter, but just like we need to talk about like what is this relationship that we have with friends and stuff like look like, and how are we supposed to handle those, and how do we honor God through our friendships and stuff like that. And so I would say I try my best to have as much stuff planned in advance as possible. But again, there are times where it's like, man, we just really need to talk about this right now. And so that's kind of how I operate.
Yeah, and I like what you said. Like, you kind of took a temperature and was like, we need to kind of shift and talk about this, which is always signs of a great leader. Because the one thing I noticed about you, I mean, I never heard you spoke before, but when you were speaking to the kids, it's like you knew who your audience was. You wasn't talking above them, you wasn't talking below them. You were like talking at them, which I'm like, that is almost very hard to find, because when you bring most pastors in that teach the kids, it's like they kind of teach them as they're teaching adults, and it's kind of like going over their head. But like the way you talk to it, it made it so plain and like in their language, where it didn't, like, to them it didn't seem like you're preaching to them. It's like you're just talking to them. But it's like, no, like he's like giving like valuable like information, and they're just taking it as a conversation. So like, did you have to learn kind of how to like talk to students, or like did you always like think like, I know I'm a people person, so I can talk to them this way?
I would say this. I think probably my teaching style just naturally is probably more for middle school, high school, college age kids than it is for anyway, just naturally. But I think part of that is probably because when I was in student ministry, when I was in middle school and high school, I know that my favorite teachers were the ones who were on that level with us.
Yes.
They weren't the same age as us, but they were the ones who spoke, kind of like us, spoke to us on our level. They weren't above us. They didn't try to like dumb it down or baby it down for us, talking below us. Like they just met us right where we were at. And I would say that's probably a byproduct of the style that I teach. Is I just want to make students feel the most comfortable, especially I would say even in our environment. We were talking earlier. Verve is a church for people who don't like church and don't know who Jesus is. Like, that's who we reach. We're one of the closest churches to the Strip here in Las Vegas, and so we get people who walk through our doors that don't know who Jesus is. Literally, may have never heard who Jesus is before, or have been completely burned by church, don't like church, whatever that may be. And our student ministry is really a direct like reflection of that as well. We have students that their parents don't come to church. They kind of find rides together to get there. They didn't grow up going to church when they were little kids or anything like that. Like, so like for me, it's just like, how do I best teach for our kids? And so I try to take that approach anywhere that I speak, not just for our student ministry, but anywhere I speak. So,
man, and like how you were saying, like your church is closest to the Strip, like you guys are the definition of a non-judgmental church, because you could literally get anybody who just kind of randomly passes on their way to the Strip or leaving the Strip, like coming in. It's like, oh, they're open. Let me just go in and see that. Which to me, I think is like super cool, because it's like you really kind of like a melting pot of like everybody in there. You have the full-time Christians who know Jesus. Then you also have like, I come sometime. Then you always have the ones I just randomly came by as I saw it like on the Strip. And it's like you guys like kind of like, it's like the biggest like way to evangelize. Like, why not evangelize? And your church is right there.
Yeah, it's so it's really funny. I'd say about a month ago, I met a guy who came to our church. He came and visited in the middle of the week, and I happened to be kind of close to the front door when he walked in, so I kind of met him there. And then come to find out, he came that next Sunday. Come to find out, he found us because he Googled punk rock churches in Las Vegas, and we popped up. I have no idea how we popped up, why we popped up, but when he Googled punk rock churches in Las Vegas, it popped up. Verve, he showed up, and he's been coming just about every week since. So, I
didn't even know that was a thing you could Google search as punk rock church.
Yeah, I didn't know either. And why we are the church that pops up when you do that, I have no idea. But no idea. I mean, I'm glad he's here. So,
they always say God has a sense of humor. Maybe that's what And it's like, it's crazy that he like found you. It's like, that's where he's supposed to be, and like he found it based on
100%.
Something that no one else would find out. Like, who really searches a punk rock church and comes up to that?
I have no idea.
So yeah, I mean, I'm gonna be there in a couple. Like I said, it'll be a couple weeks. I'm definitely going to come and check it out. Like, I'm super excited. I still can't pronounce your pastor's name. I like read it, and I'm like, I'm reading it wrong. I know I'm reading it wrong. Like, how do you say his last name?
His name is Vince Antonucci.
Yeah, I was way off.
He sounds like a mob. He sounds like a mob boss.
But like, because I saw a couple of his lines, I'm like, he seems like a real people person. Mm-hmm. So like, when you like first came in, like, was your interview like with him? Like, how did you guys kind of link up? Like, how did you link up with Verb before you got out there?
Oh man, so that's actually kind of a crazy story. Right out of college, I started senior year of college and out of college, I worked at a church in Kansas City, and I was on a mission trip to Poland, and actually about to leave for a mission trip to Poland, and some kind of crazy family stuff was happening, and all kinds of stuff and chaoticness was just going on in life. And the morning of the trip that we were leaving for Poland, I almost pulled the plug on the trip. Because I was like, I'm not leaving my wife kind of in this mess of stuff. And basically she commits me to go. And so chaoticness for 24 hours leading up to the trip. I get on a 19-hour flight, to Europe, and it was just like silence. And I was like, whoa, this is weird. And I was like, all right, God, like, feels like you're trying to tell me something. Don't really know what this is. Like, whatever you got, like, lay it on me. And just kind of like, we'll just like spent time with God. And when we landed in Amsterdam, flew into Poland, and within the first 12 hours of me being in Poland, I had 3 different people who either reached out or asked about like a job. And I was like, what the heck? Like, I'm at a church here in Kansas City. Like, I like what I do. We like where we're at. We weren't looking to leave whatsoever. But it was just like, okay, God, like, what? Is this something? Like, are we supposed to be moving? Are we supposed to be doing something different? And one of them was Vince. And the cool part about Vince was I actually known Vince. Vince and my dad have known each other. They were on staff kind of together at a church when they were early in their ministry years. And so they knew each other from a long way back. And he said, hey, you want to talk about a job? And I was like, I'm on the other side of the world right now. Like, let me get home.
Literally the other side of the world.
We'll talk maybe. Yeah, literally. And so came home and started having some conversations, and like came out and interviewed. This was all mid-pandemic, just by the way. So we came out mid-pandemic. My wife was 7 months pregnant at this point.
Oh, wow.
And so like I was like, man, are we really about to move right now? Like in the state of our lives and the state of the world that was going on, are we really about to like just pick up and move to Las Vegas from Kansas City? And God just made it super clear, like, this is what I want you to do. And so we were like, okay, like,
you make it possible, God. We're just gonna say yes.
Exactly. Exactly. Kind of like what I talked about, at the beginning, like when Autumn and I had conversations when we started dating, like, hey, I think this is what I'm gonna do. I think I'm gonna go into ministry. And she was like, all right, let's do it. Like, that's kind of just the attitude we've had about stuff since then. It's just like, we're going to do whatever God tells us to do for as long as he tells us to do it. And if he tells us to start doing something different, like, who are we to get in the way of that?
Who are we?
Who
are we?
Yeah,
literally,
let's just get out of God's way and do what he's telling us to do. So that's really how that all happened. Like, but man, I'm super glad we're in Vegas. We love it. I mean, man.
I'm pretty sure your parents are happy because now you're a 4-hour drive instead of a flight.
Yes. Yes. A 4-hour drive rather than a flight is much better. They're happy that we moved back with the grandbaby closer.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
So,
and they have the cutest kid, guys. The cutest kid. Like, the cutest kid. And, and I always say that I think pastors' kids are some of the strongest kids out there because growing up in church, they can hear and see people doing wrong, to their pastor, to their dad, or to their mom that they don't see. You see the people talking about them, you see the people doing bad to them, and it's like for them to be that resilient to like, conquer on and like still like, go to the ministry. I think that is like super incredible because most people, if you say something about their dad, they're just going to say something to you, it's going to go out there. But it takes a strong person to be like, dang, I hear what they're saying about my dad, but or my mom, but I'm still going to like, I know they're not like that. I know they don't do this. And like I'm still going to support their ministry. So like when you left the ministry, like to go like to college and stuff like that, how was that since you like grew up basically in your dad's church almost?
Yeah, that was a weird time in my life because it was like, okay, I know God's calling me into ministry of some sort. Didn't know what that was yet. And so I went to a ministry school. I went to Manhattan Christian College in Manhattan, Kansas. And I think I just said something that Alexa picked up on in the other room. Anyway, but yeah, so we moved literally almost halfway across the country to Manhattan, Kansas. And, I wouldn't trade my time there for anything. I loved, how they prepare you for ministry, how they teach you how to teach and to do all these things that ministry entails. And, and studying the Bible more in depth was fantastic. But it was definitely a big culture shock. Phoenix and Kansas are two completely different places, two completely different types of churches, really. That West Coast, Midwest church is just different. Not that either one is better or anything like that, but just how things operate and how things do are different. And so it was definitely a culture shock for me. But like I said, I wouldn't trade that time for anything because I think it prepared me for ministry. Like you were saying, like, to your point of like, you see as a pastor's kid, you see all that, that negative stuff, that happens growing up in church. I would say that was probably one of the reasons why I was so reluctant to get into ministry, kind of early on. But at the same time, like we talked about earlier, I think that's probably those experiences that I had, those things that happened probably prepared me for ministry even more than I thought, at the time, for sure. Like, because, again, there's not a whole lot of shock factor now for me when something happens, or there's not a whole lot of like, oh my gosh, like that's earth shattering to me. Like there's not really a lot that happens for me now. And so I think it prepared me for ministry even more going through that kind of stuff. And then of course my time at MCC prepared me for a ton. And so I wouldn't trade that time for anything. That 6 years we lived in Kansas was fantastic. I loved it.
Yeah.
But I sure am glad we're back here, closer to the West
Closer.
Coast. So
So like and last question for you, when you told your dad that you're like, I'm really gonna pursue this full ministry, like how did that conversation go? Like, was he excited? Like, I knew he was gonna do it, or was he like, are you kind of sure you want to do this? Like, how did that conversation go? Because he's like,
I
I know what
think
it all entails. Like,
I think and he probably said the same thing. He saw it in me that I was heading down the path of being in ministry of some sort. Didn't know what that was yet. He saw me heading down the path of being in ministry well before I did.
mm-hmm.
He and a couple of my youth pastors and stuff that I had, they all saw that in me far before I did. So that conversation was super easy between my dad and I. Like when I was like, "Hey, I think this is a thing," and he's like, "I know." He's like, I've thought it for a while. I've known for a while. You just haven't. That's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And
like, thank you for accepting it finally.
So I think exactly right. But it's so cool because it's like, I've gotten into a point in my life now where the relationship with my dad has changed so much. Like it still is father-son relationship,
mm-hmm.
but like on a whole different level. Like my dad is my best friend. Like
Yeah.
I can go to my dad with anything. Like if I'm struggling with something at work or struggling with something at home or whatever, like whatever it is, he's the first person I'm texting. Like, and I would say that's what's so cool is that, while there still is that father-son relationship, that relationship has changed in a good way, like for the better. Like, it's just awesome, man. My dad's the best.
Yeah, and probably the cool thing that you got is that he's done it so long, he's probably heard and seen everything that you've already talked about. Like, oh, I remember that. I remember that time. This how I got through it. So that's like super cool that it's like able to have that kind of conversation. Like, now we have like this father-son relationship, but now like we're in the same line of work. So now we can have this either other conversation and I can lean on you for information. Have you ever like stolen any of his like messages? Like, I'm gonna use that for my church. I'm gonna use that on Sunday. Like, that was good.
Oh yeah. He's sent me notes and stuff before. He's asked me to send some of my notes and stuff. Like that's, I think pastors in general should do more of that. Sharing ideas and sharing thoughts and, man, that was it's like, man, that was a really great point that I've never really thought about that before. Like, how did you come to that? I think pastors should do that even more than they do now. Because scripture is so amazing in the way that it, like, the Bible talks about scripture being alive and breathing and all that. And like, that's so true. Like, because you could read a verse and read something about it and get this from it. And I can read the exact same verse and get something completely different from it. And both of those things can be true. Both of those things can be absolutely true. That's what's so cool about like God's word is like, it speaks to each of us at different times, at different levels of like, I could go back and read a verse that I read in high school and read it completely different than I would now.
And get a completely different message from it.
Exactly. And so I think that's what's so cool is that when pastors do share and when they share ideas and thoughts, like it's just all of us like growing closer to God together. Like this is not a one-on-one journey like with God. Like we're supposed to do this in community. Like this is what we talked about in students a couple weeks ago. Like we're supposed to be doing this together. This is not an island that's just you and God. Like it's you and your community and how you and your community can then grow closer to God. Like it's not this one-on-one thing. Like there is a one-on-one relationship you have with God, but like we are supposed to do it within a community of believers as well, which is super cool.
Yeah, it's like a gathering, which was crazy. Like, cause I've been going to your dad's church, I think for like almost a year, and I've been playing there, and I never knew how many people like went to Refinery until Easter, and they had the outside service. I'm like, this is a huge community. I had never seen it. I was like, wow, this is like cool. And the fact that, it's like, we're not in this alone, even though we're like separate for like COVID and stuff, but it's like, I have someone who I could talk to and who I can lean on, or someone's like going through like the same thing. Cause I think especially during the pandemic, a lot of people who weren't really, like outside talkers on, like, it was kind of like hard for them because it's like, I talk to my friends at church, but it's like, I'm not at church now. It's on virtual. So to still maintain those like friendships and conversations like that, like during that time, is like super great, and especially with you guys moving in a pandemic. Like, so that like took faith like by itself. So when you guys moved, was it like still like when the strip was like completely empty?
Oh yeah. So when we moved, casinos were still closed. Most restaurants were still closed or just doing takeout. Like we moved literally. So we moved July. Our daughter was born on June 23rd. We moved July 10th into our apartment here in Las Vegas.
Wow.
And so of 2020. And so like we moved literally. I say mid-pandemic. We're still going through pandemic, so who knows what the middle of it really is anymore. Yeah, exactly. But like we moved when we moved, like stuff was still shut down. Like there was still uncertainty of like when things were going to open, when churches were going to open, and so like that was probably the biggest challenge for me in moving. Like for me, like moving somewhere new, taking on a new job like that, none of that like scares me. Like again, I'm a pretty outgoing person. I could be fairly dynamic or whatever that is. Like that like I don't struggle with that at all. But like for me, it was like I'm starting to lead this student ministry now, and I've never met any of these students. Like I've met a couple of the leaders during the interview process and stuff like that, but like I don't know any of these kids. And so like
I have no relationship with them.
Our first 6 months of like I was meeting these kids on Zoom, those who would show up. Like so we'd have a Zoom game party, or I'd teach a little bit and we'd break off into small groups and stuff on Zoom. But like for 6 or 8 months, like I didn't even meet our students in person. And so like our first weekend back, I was like jazzed. I was like, I'm gonna give you a hug. I know we're in the middle of a pandemic, but I'm a hugger and I'm gonna make you be a hugger right now because like I'm excited that I'm meeting you in person for the first time and meeting students that I had, that weren't showing up on Zoom or whatever. It was so cool to finally get back to that spot. And so, we've been in person since March, and, it's just been, so awesome.
It's like a family reunion.
Oh yeah.
You coming on back.
Yeah. A family reunion with people you've never seen in person.
Never exactly. Seen before. So like, how was that? Exactly. Like, were they like, oh, I know you. You're the dude from Zoom. Like, how was that kind of interaction when you like first saw them?
It was weird. Yeah, it was a little weird because it's like you only get this box of people, from like just below their shoulders to the top of their head. You only see this much of them, and like you're talking with them and you're getting to know them as much as possible, And students who are doing Zoom or online school all day, like they get to Sunday and they're like, I'm not jumping on Zoom, or they would be there for 10 minutes and then leave, like whatever it was. But like, it was so weird because it's like you knew these people, but you didn't really know them. And so the first time you met them in person, you were like, you're even cooler than I thought you were. Like, this is so much better than I thought.
The screen had nothing on you. Like, exactly. You're really cool in person.
You're even cooler than you were on Zoom. Like,
yeah.
But man, yeah, it's just been awesome.
Man, that's cool, man. Hey, again, I want to thank you for coming on, man. I really appreciate it. But before you go, I would just want you to pray us out before we go, if you don't mind.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, man. I appreciate you having me on anytime, man.
Yeah, it was fun.
All right, I'll pray for us, man. Hey, God, man, we just thank you for today. Man, what Jamarcus is doing here is so cool. The audience that he's getting to reach through his podcast, and God, right now, I just pray that as we go today, that we would figure out like how do we put you at the forefront of like whatever it is that we're doing. Whether it's Jamarcus on his podcast, me in student ministry, or anybody who's listening, like how do we put you at the center of whatever it is that we're doing? God, because we read all throughout Scripture, like when we put you at the center, when we choose to follow you and you alone, like so many more cool things can happen. God, if I hadn't said yes to Jesus to you, or I hadn't said yes to Jesus, 10 or 15 years ago, and to coming into full-time ministry, like I don't know where I would be at today. And like, that's so cool to think about how when we say yes to you, when we choose to follow you, like you take what this small minded thing of what we have, of like what we think of our lives, and you take it into such a different level and such a bigger thing that we could imagine. So God, right now I just pray that you would give us the strength and the passion to put you first and to follow after you every day because you've got so much more in mind for us. That's so cool. So God, we say all these things in your name. Amen.
Amen. Hey, man, thanks again This is not gonna be the last time. We're definitely be having you back. I'm gonna go
Hey,
to Vegas.
Booster
We're gonna do it in
Bros.
Vegas. Like, yeah, Booster Bro. I might as well get a Rooster Booster right now. Actually, eat my panda. Hey man, thank you so much, man. I'll see you guys
There you
later.
go.
Hey, I want to thank you guys again for joining us here with me, myself, and podcast. I want you guys to get ready for next week. We will be starting a new series. We'll actually be starting a worship series. I have different worship artists. I have different keyboard players, worship artists, all things worship is going to be happening next month. I'm super excited about that, about what's coming there. Stay plugged in with me, myself, and podcasts. We're on YouTube. We are on Spotify. We are definitely on iTunes and definitely here on Facebook. I want to thank you guys for coming again. You guys have a great night.